first. Hello. So, are we muted? Can people hear us?
Hi, Scott. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good. I'm doing great, thanks. Doing really good.
Great. So, for everyone joining, hello, Frank the Tank. Hi, Stefan. Really great to see you guys jumping in so early. So obviously, as you know, we've got myself, Scott's Animal Adventures, and my special guest today is Wally at Supreme Gecko. So I've actually known of Wally for a good couple of years now, and I've actually personally been in touch with Wally for the past, I'd say 6, 7, maybe more months. Absolutely lovely guy, and I'm really excited to start picking his brain. So we're going to do some chat about isopods, some chat about geckos. Obviously, Wally's got over 20 years experience breeding geckos, and over 5 years experience breeding isopods. It is 20 years, isn't it?
It feels like 2 sometimes. Some days it feels like 2. Some days it feels like 102.
Yeah. So my main question would be, your bulk of your experience, was that more of like the main pet gecko species, or were you always kind of branched out like you are now with your Periodora and your more exotic geckos?
What a great question. I can relate that all the way back to everything that I relate to in this hobby, and that's my fish keeping days. I don't know if you can see behind me, and I think I have the pump running. Maybe I'm going to turn that off real quick. Sorry, folks. I'm sure the noise is dry. Can you hear it?
I can't hear it at all, so I'd say leave it on.
Really? Okay. Okay, I'll leave it on. That's surprising because to me it sounds just overwhelming. It sounds like it fills the room. It's such a big pump for 20 tanks. But anyways, I go back to when I was probably 25, so that's 102 years ago. And I started keeping fish, and it was like 2 days into keeping fish that I realized that I wanted more and different and exotic and rare. And I had to be the best of the best in breeding the rarest of the rarest. And I think I bred fish probably about 15 years. And eventually, I stopped breeding fish. I got out of fish, tropical fish, about the time the internet hit. So just the worst possible scenario. Because for my business, I was getting into the internet. I was driving our company forward with internet presence, and I understood the ramifications and the potential for the internet. So this is going way back to, oh my gosh, Comcast, just all kinds of, early initial phases of the internet. So back then, I got out of tropical fish because of work, and we had 3 boys. We just had our 3rd son, so I knew that with the fish, the 3 kids, and work, I could pick 2. And the family was going to be one of those. So I wasn't ready to give up the business, my professional career at that time. So I kept that, and I dropped the fish. So I had over 125 tanks. And from one weekend of making that decision to the next weekend of selling everything, I was out of tropical fish. But at that point, I was diversified into the rarest of the African cichlids and South American histogramas and things like that. Got out of fish, and it was a crazy, crazy time. We put the word out, and within, a couple of hours, we had people, I want this, I want that tank, I want your pump, I want these fish. It was that quick that I was out of tropical fish. And it was probably about 10 years of really no hobbies per se, other than collecting baseball cards. And I tried my hand at orchids, and when I tried orchids, I built the room downstairs, had the full lights. So as you're kind of guessing, when I do something, I kind of go full tilt. There is no, start and then gear up. It's start and immediately into everything that I do.
Yeah,
So
just improve yourself.
yeah, it's full steam ahead. So when I got into reptiles about 20 years ago, 21 years ago, I didn't start. I didn't start keeping leopard geckos and crested geckos. I kept chameleons. So I feel one of the most difficult animals, one of the most difficult reptiles around are chameleons because they have very, very special needs, or at least they did 20 years ago that we didn't really understand everything about chameleons,
Yeah,
lighting,
very
the food,
specific.
supplementation.
Yeah. Even the likes of screen cages. I mean, back then you wouldn't have had a screen cage, so everyone's chameleons were dying after a couple of years until someone with a really good sort of knack for building made screen cages, and it's just gone from there. And
Yeah,
it's the same with obviously I'm more into my snakes than my lizards. And a similar example would be like the Asian rat snakes. A lot of the Asian rat snakes, when they came in the late 80s, early 90s, they were classed as almost impossible to keep. But then a lot of people decided to actually put in the research, and they found out they were keeping them too hot. They were keeping them with the antibiotics and that needed the heat to work, and so they had to reformulate the antibiotics slightly so that they could work at a lower temperature, and then suddenly it was that catalyst and people were really able to move forward. But chameleons, I mean, I'd commend you today if you came out of exotic fish and went straight onto chameleons. I've not been sort of brave enough to even look into it. I mean, I've got 3 dogs, and a lot of people say the second you've got noises, they're like leopard geckos in their crested geckos in their tails. People say the second there's a noise or there's a change in the air, they just drop.
it I had some good mentors. So,
Mm.
of anything that I say in this hobby, there's a lot of great sources of information out there. There's, obviously the internet. Um, but the problem with the internet is that there's really, really good information and there's really, really bad information. So I tell this almost on a daily basis. Go out to a reptile show, go out to the internet, go out to a sales page, go out to Morph Market, go out to any source that you can find information about animals. Find the breeders that are willing to talk and find 2 or 3 that are willing to share their information. If a breeder isn't willing to share the information with you, move on to the next breeder. But find some mentors, stick with them, ask them the questions. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't be doing your research. That means do your research and bounce the ideas off of them. Hey, I have a problem where my female isn't breeding for 2 months. She was breeding for a couple of months. She stopped again. I think it's because of this. What do you think? So I think that you should always have a good mentor. And for the chameleons, I certainly did. I started with veils, and within weeks, I was into Panther chameleons, the really beautiful blues and greens and reds. I had to have the reddest of the reds, and they started breeding, and the females were doing great, and they lived about a year and a half, and then they would die.
Yeah.
Start over with the new babies.
Even with people now that can keep them up to 6 to 8 years, it's really
Yes.
incredible.
And again, I attribute that back 20 years ago to the insufficient lighting that we had. The biggest issue, I think, supplementation. There were a lot of different factors going on, but I was doing the best that I possibly could with the information that I possibly had with the people that had the same information. So I kept chameleons for a while, and I realized that wasn't for me because it felt like it was more of an animal factory. We would breed a female, she would have 3 or 4 clutches, and she would die. And then I would take the babies and breed them. Oh, beautiful, beautiful animal.
Panther chameleon, guys.
Yes, yes. So I had the Tamatov. So the color around the eye isn't even as on your picture, and that's a great, great, great picture. But the color around that one's eyes wasn't as brilliant as the whole body of these Tamatovs. The Tamatovs were just blood red and just blood red all the time. Just beautiful animals. But again, that was enough of that. Got a pair of leopards, one enclosure, bred another enclosure, and all of a sudden I had 20 breeding leopard geckos my first year. And while doing the leopard geckos, I thought, well, these crested geckos are kind of cool and they're popular, and why don't I just try some crested geckos too? Because I'm getting insects for the leopard geckos, I might as well get some, cresteds because I've got the insects here too. Second year that I was in it, I had 40 breeding pair of leopard geckos, and I had probably 30 pair of crested geckos.
Yeah.
Oh, it was, and I think sometimes the tubs, the enclosures breed faster than the animals. Put 2 tubs together, and all of a sudden you have 4 tubs. So I kept leopard geckos and crested. Well, I've always had leopard geckos and crested geckos, but it didn't take very long, probably about 3 years, until I wanted to try this animal or that animal. I think one of the very first ones that I tried was little viper geckos, and then I got into pygmy geckos, and then the more advanced Periodora, and the more advanced Chondrodactylus and Pachyodactylus, and oh my gosh, look at that baby, internet, and bye. So, my first, within 10 years, I had probably 100, 150 enclosures, and was able to turn around the animals pretty well. And like you alluded to in the very beginning about the research and the development and trying different things and trying to improve, I felt like I was moving forward in the hobby. And I continued that, and about 5 years ago, we were producing lots of leopard geckos, lots of crested geckos, lots of gargoyles, lots of rare geckos. But around that period, a year before that, a couple of years before that, I had a pretty high-level job with a company as a project manager, and we had multi-million-dollar projects. And I was moving forward and had a couple of projects that took up, I have to say, 70 to 80 hours a week, and that doesn't include, nights or weekends where I was still on the computer full time.
Yeah, when you get into that kind of work, it never stops.
It just never stops. For a couple of years there, then my wife, Nanette, had to jump in and take care of the animals. And after a couple of years...
I'm so lucky to have such a wife as well. She's, even on the live streams and that, if anyone's been over to Wally's channel and that and knows Wally, like him and Nanette, they are just both amazing people, and she's got just as much of an interest and a real kind of passion for these animals and this kind of hobby as Wally has, and to have such a supportive wife is brilliant.
I'm blessed. I absolutely am.
Even with the sticks when you was cutting up that log for the Portelio, that was just brilliant. Like her reaction and everything was just perfect.
Thank you very much. We enjoy each other. We complement each other. I'm kind of big picture and thinking about different things. Here's the difference between Nanette and I. And I had talked about her taking care of the animals for a couple of years. For me to go downstairs and feed the isopods, it's 4 hours. I'm 4 hours in from beginning to end. Nanette can go down there and feed the isopods and be done in 35 minutes. So, if I have a couple of different things that I'm doing, like I have to feed the isopods, I have to feed the leopard geckos, and I have to feed the babes, those 3 groups. I have like 6 or 7 different groups of things down there, maybe more than that. But if I have 2 or 3 groups of things to do, speaking of Nanette.
Hey there. Hi. I'll join you for a bit.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Well, this is kind of unplanned, Scott. I am unexpectedly joined by my wife, Nanette. So I was just telling Scott, I don't know if you can hear Scott, and I don't know if you really want to unplug.
No, that's all right.
You sure? You can try this. We could share earpieces here. Now we'll be pulling on each other and tugging.
This is what I'm talking about, guys. This is a power couple right here, sharing the headset.
It's kind of a yeah, exactly. Good luck with that. You might have to jump in a little bit closer. So I was mentioning that we've got this cord all flopping around here. I was mentioning that it takes me about 4 hours to do the isopods. It takes Nanette about 35 minutes. So if I have 2 or 3 things to do downstairs, that's an all-day adventure, and it's just crazy. So I'm going to, I'll reach around and I'll hey, Scott, bear with me for just a second.
Yeah, no worries.
But you can't hear Scott.
Okay, but I don't want you to unplug and have a problem.
No, we won't have a crowd.
Okay,
Famous last words.
sorry.
I'm loving the expanses on this shirt.
Hi, Scott.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we'll turn this up. If this doesn't work, we're going to. Then you'll leave.
Volume 40.
Bear with us, folks.
Yeah,
How
no
is that,
worries.
Scott? Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can
45.
hear you crystal clear.
Excellent, excellent. Sorry about that interruption, but I think this will work better. And the earpiece goes over there somewhere. So I was mentioning that, you know, I'm very, very fortunate to have Nanette. I don't know where I would be. Here's a great example about, well, earlier this year, I came down with COVID and I was out for about a month. It was about a month that I was down. I couldn't even get out of bed. I would get out of bed. I would go to my email, check orders, 5 minutes, and I was done. I just could not function whatsoever. So that took me down. Last week, I came down with some kind of stomach virus, and I really struggled to get downstairs much. Nanette was there taking care of everything. But again, you know, my all-day adventures are Nanette's 1 hour, you know, let me get in, let me feed, let me water, and I'm out of here.
But from keeper to keeper, is that because you get sidetracked with your favorites and you just sit there watching them for a bit?
Yes. My favorite time, you know, I enjoy things like this. I enjoy YouTube, I enjoy Facebook, I enjoy answering questions. I get probably anywhere from 20 to 40 questions a day on animals, on isopods, and I love that part of the day. My favorite part is going into an enclosure, a gecko enclosure, and moving some rocks around, moving a hide, making sure the animals are okay, cleaning a little poo, putting a couple of mealworms in there, and here it is 15 minutes later. Now I haven't even looked at the second enclosure. So, you know, that's my time. That's my relaxation time, is with the animals and checking them out, making sure everything's okay.
And that's what a lot of people outside of this hobby kind of don't see. Well, they'll sit down and they might watch a TV show for an hour. We're happy to just do a bit of maintenance on the isopods or on our animals, or we'll have a little move around and we'll see how they react to it. And that is our rest and relaxation. That's what really brings us back up when we're down. It sort of closes a day after a busy day. That is our TV binge, you know.
It really is, you know. I tell you, anybody that has multiple enclosures and you can balance that between work and family and your true relaxation time, going on vacations, going to the beach, doing something else. Anybody that can balance that, you know, hats off. So wanted to continue the story there. That was that my stomach. I wanted to continue the story and say that about 3 years ago, I retired. I really thought, you know, this 80 hours of work and, you know, then some time with the animals and social media and everything. Boy, what am I going to do with all this free time? So it changed from like 14 hours a day working to 14 hours a day working, but I'm now enjoying my boss and my company, and not my company personally, but my company, Supreme Gecko, and it feels like I'm moving things forward the way that I want to. So it's been a
proud moment to be able to see everything come together after all these years of really putting in the passion and the love to it, because I fully guarantee that when you started, you probably didn't see YouTube as anything that would ever even be a material that you would ever have, you know. And the fact that you've got like your skits and your comedy aspect, you've got your character, Nanette's got her little cameos, and obviously you had Crystal unboxed isopods a few weeks ago, or probably a few months ago now. It feels like a few months ago. And it's just lovely that you've got such a positive and such a real, genuine, true look at your company and your hobby, you know. And the thing with YouTube is it's so brilliant because you can see the transparency. You can see that you're not putting up a facade for the screen. And you know that first interaction on Facebook when I just happened across you on my suggestions, and I thought I'll send him a friend request. He's probably never going to reply, and we've had these conversations, and now we're here. It's just, you know, it's truly amazing, and you really should be so proud of what you've managed to achieve.
I greatly appreciate that. My goal years ago, you know, when did I start YouTube? I started YouTube probably about nine years ago, something like that. And I was putting out just
at least, because your early leopard gecko videos I was watching the other day, they were 11 years ago.
You weren't so great.
sorry about that. So
It's okay.
my earlier videos were just garbage. You know, if you compare them to now,
Honestly, they're better than some that I've seen coming out this year. You know, apart from the camera quality, obviously, because of what you were dealing with 11 years ago, the audio, just there's no change in character. You're you, and that's the best bit. You go back 11 years, it's still you, and that's what people you don't get. Like you go back 11 years on, say, Snake Bites TV or something like that, and it's a completely different environment than it is today because it's become a lot more, how do you say it, viewer focused.
yeah,
Whereas you are hobby focused. You are
Yeah.
yourself, and you're putting out yourself. And you know, I think everyone should really, you know, I mean, we've got a question from Stefan that really links into this about, you know, what's your proudest moment you've had since breeding isopods and geckos? So I don't know if you want to do one for one and one for the other, or the combination of both.
I would love to do that. My proudest moment, I'm going to choose isopods first. So my proudest moment with isopods is 3 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago now. Oh my gosh, how time flies. So 5 years ago, I started with isopods. I got out of them a little bit because of work. I got back into them simply because I had to have something breeding. Here I have a full facility of geckos that need to be reconditioned. It's the fall. They need to go through brumation. They need to be reconditioned in the springtime. They probably aren't going to breed. You know, now we're 6, 7 seasons. You know, I'm immediately getting back in thinking it might be 2 years before I really get back into getting eggs and production.
And even then, one it's a pair. So you've got 2 eggs per gecko. It's a very, very small scale thing. Like a lot of people, they see reptiles as all being the same. So you see a clutch of snake eggs, you think, oh, geckos must do the same thing. It's not. It's 2, and one of them quite often, when you're starting up in that, especially when they're new females, it'll either be one might be infertile, both might be, and you get those losses before you start getting in. And even with the experience, it's just the nature of the animals getting into that mature aspect.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
I completely agree. The isopods do make it so much more enjoyable in the short term because you see them, especially with the Porcellio like Lavis and Porcellionides pruinosis. You put them in there, you come back a week later. Sorry about the dual carriageway. You come back a week later, and then you've got like 5 times the amount you had before.
That's absolutely true. So I came back into this hobby and realizing that I wasn't going to produce anything for at least 6 to 8 months, possibly some of my animals for 2 years, while they conditioned back up, while I was waiting for seasons to change, and then finally, 2 years later, springtime, maybe some breeding. So I knew that I had, a lot of feeding, no checking for eggs, no checking for babies. Just that's kind of, my whole intent of keeping an animal, keeping the fish behind us. Anything that I do is to make sure that I'm keeping them the absolutely best that I can. And my ultimate proof that I'm keeping them the best that I can is to eventually get eggs and eventually get babies. So without that, justification, without that gratification of seeing these babies, it just felt like, why am I know I have to do this feeding, but it just kind of gets boring after a while. So getting into isopods and getting, like you said, some scabers and dairy cows, and gave me that instant gratification. So, I realized right away I can breed powder blues. I can breed powder orange. I can breed some scalers. Dairy cows. I went to Ryan McVeigh of Madison Area Herp Society and many other things. And I said, I want to try something a little bit, not the top of the line, but something a little bit different, a little bit more difficult. And he gave me some Hoffman-Stegai, Porcilio Hoffman-Stegai, the Titans. I thought, am I ready for these, Ryan? Give them a try. If you lose them, Wally, I'm right here. So within like a month, I have little baby Hoffman-Stegai Mankai running around. And I thought, wow, I have really mastered this art of keeping isopods. And well, little did I realize that, there's so many more difficult species. But it was for me with the isopods, it felt like that stepping stone to make me feel like I was doing something right with the isopods. For geckos, oh my gosh. There's been so many rewarding situations. I think one of the things that I feel most proud of is that we moved from, especially because we do a lot of reptile shows, and we have for many, many years, done a lot of reptile shows. We sell online. We actually have people stopping, at the door asking for animals all the time. I just hope our neighbors don't call us in thinking we're selling something else. But we're
I don't know the pot father.
We kind of come out, give the bag, and get the money, and run back inside. So,
especially with COVID, with the contactless delivery, just put that on the floor.
So, I think the thing that really made me the proudest was that we made that transition from maybe, I don't know, years and years ago, from maybe 10 breeder pair of crested geckos to, I think within maybe my 4th or 5th year, we bumped from like, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 pairs to 50. To 50. And I realized that we're going to have a lot of babies. We're going to have a lot of babies, but the demand was there. We were selling really well. And it's not about the business. It's about, moving things forward and getting, there's nothing more gratifying for me than to do a reptile show and to show off a crested gecko to a family that's looking for their first reptile, and to see the kids holding a crested gecko and to see the smiles on their face. This whole money, and Nanette knows this. Yeah, exactly. Nanette knows this more than anybody. For me, a show is about showing off and talking and not doing the business at all. So it's like, okay, here's a crested gecko, and yeah, perfect. I want to buy it. Oh, okay, well, I guess we've got to do that money thing. Nanette, you want to grab some money and do the change and everything?
So Nanette's the bookkeeper, and you're the face.
Nanette, yeah, and that's probably a bad representation for Supreme Gecko if I'm the face of Supreme Gecko. Nanette is the accountant. So if I sell something, 90% of the time I'm taking money and walking over it, or I'm probably passing them off to Nanette. Nanette, do the money thing. If I actually do the money, take money, get change, and if I don't write it in the books, we have a little, board that we write things down on. If I don't write it in the board, I think one day she's just going to fire me. So, that's a gratification kind of thing for me, is to do the sale. So we made that big move to more animals. And when we did, I had to build 3 different racks. I actually had to build 4 different racks now that I think of it. And that first year we went from, I don't even know how many babies, to probably about 500 or 600 baby crested geckos that we produced. So we had crested geckos all over the place. But what makes me proud of that is not the ability to, I'm going to say this a real poor way, but to manufacture these animals, because not one baby ever felt like it was just another product ever. It was a baby crested gecko, but everyone was treated differently. But I think my problem,
you're essentially like their godparent. Like you are that initial step. You've seen them from nothing to a bulge in their mum to egg to gecko, and then you're seeing them go into this kid that's absolutely just infatuated with, and that is an incredible, powerful thing, like work-wise and just in general. Like anyone that works in that kind of industry, you're essentially like a hobby version of a midwife. And I know that sounds really funny, but it's true.
It is true. In the wild, they'll fend for themselves. They know what to do. Yeah.
But geckos is really special.
I think you're right. And, in captivity, we are their world. They don't get water unless we're there. They don't get the food unless we're there taking care and knowing what to do with them. And they don't get the lighting or the heating or anything without, us having the information to provide the right amount and supply them with these life essential kind of elements. So going from just a handful of babies a year to about 500, my proud moment was that I was prepared with building all the racks in anticipation, not waiting until, oh my gosh, we have 100 babies, what are we going to do now? To next year, we're going to have about 400 to 500 to 600 babies. Let's plan right now for 6 to 8 to 10 months in advance. So,
and then seeing the build at the end of it must be just incredible.
It was, but
for anyone that hears racks and instantly gets like a negative reaction, this is in a breeding sense. This isn't like a long-term keeping. This isn't their forever home. This is just from egg to sale and like the first initial part of their life when you need that kind of sterile environment to make sure that they're getting through the first few steps of their entrance into the world. So I don't want anyone going away thinking, oh, Wally Kern keeps everything in racks, because it's not true.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for pointing that out. So some of our videos will be based on setups, but some of them are based on breeding enclosures. I had a question yesterday. Why would you put this animal in a 15-quart tub? That's horrendously cruel to the animal. They're not used to that in nature. And my response is always, thank you very much for your participation. Thank you for your input. I understand. And a better situation would be for them to be actually in the wild. That's the best situation. But I'm giving them the best possible care that I possibly can. And I do feel like I'm doing a service in getting animals into other people's hands. Now, if I'm
start off with, because if you keep them in their final size viv, like for example, I have a boa. If I keep a boa from a hatchling in a 6 foot or an 8 foot viv, I mean my one's a dwarf, so it should just need the 4 foot. But if I did that, I'd A, lose it, B, never really be able to find it to feed it and then make sure it's eating properly. I wouldn't be able to clean it out because I wouldn't know where the poo is. And it's everything like that. Like, you've got to think, yes, in the wild they would have infinite space, but they have a locked-in biome that they stick to for their first few months of life. And all you're doing is you're creating an environment that is safe, that is monitoring, the same as having a baby in an ICU chamber, and really just making sure that it's healthy before it goes home. It's that connection to that side of like keeping humans. Like,
I couldn't agree more. And there's so many folklore kind of stories out there about animal care, and from snakes to chameleons to geckos to anything. One of the big ones with crested geckos is babies. Keep them in a small enclosure, and I 100% agree. But the follow-up, 99% of the time, is keep them in a small enclosure because they can't find the food. That's a crock of something. That's a crock of gecko poop.
Quite often they will feed the premixed food, and the gecko won't be drawn to a premixed food.
Yeah.
If you're going to keep them in a larger enclosure, then you need to give them food that they will naturally associate as food, which would be the likes of pinhead crickets, your mini mealworms. Let's get onto that later. And like that kind of thing, because they'll see it moving and it's a trigger and it's natural. If you're giving them rapashi, they might not eat, and they might have to be in a small enclosure. And then when they get hungry enough, they might discover that this is food.
Yes.
That's my kind of thought on that.
Yes.
You can give a crested gecko as much as it wants, but you need to provide it food that it can A, associate with food, and B, something that it's going to be triggered to hunt.
Yeah, and I follow that up all the time with it's kind of not so much about the food. The food is a very important thing for keeping crested geckos in small enclosures. We do that, and we start with the crested gecko diet, something in front of their face all the time. People will ask how
a milk carton lid or something like that. It's in front of them. They're more likely to try it.
Exactly. It's in front of them all the time. They know exactly where it is. They know the smell. They know the texture. They know everything about it. So after a month, their brain is feed on this diet. But after about a month, then we'll switch them over and we'll start feeding more live foods. And our favorite is obviously mealworms. And right after that is small dubious. Eventually, we might throw some crickets in there just so that their new owners, if that's what they want to feed, crickets, that's what the crested geckos know.
Quite often, when you've got a pet shop, crickets are going to be your easiest to find, at least in the UK. So it's good to kind of, you can offer as much as you want. You can offer silkworms, you can offer the horned worms, but if the person that's buying it can't find that in their area, then it's going to be an extremely difficult switch over.
Yes.
So that's another thing that is really good as a breeder, to think in that kind of way. Like, it's not necessarily what we'd really want to be feeding the gecko, but it's what the gecko is going to have access to. So we can give them the variety, but we need to give them these foods that we don't necessarily prefer, because the chances are the owner is going to be using that.
Exactly. And we're seeing, at least in the US here, that dubious are becoming more and more, I almost said popular. I don't know if they're popular. I think that they're more accepted. So you can go into just about any pet store now here, a reptile store especially. If they're carrying more than one or two reptile types, you're going to probably find dubia roaches there. And we feed a lot of dubia roaches, a lot, because it's a good food source. It's easy to come by.
Easily, there's no doubt that they're going to be more mainstream, especially with people adopting them for reptiles. Because I think initially roaches were more of an arachnid and an invert thing, and it's come over for the reptiles from that.
Exactly. And I'll finish this point off to the proudest moment was being able to move forward with providing the necessary care, going from a very small number of babies, a small operation, to a bigger operation, almost seamlessly, very quickly. I just want to see if that sounds better. Thank you, Stefan, thank you very much for that question. Oh, I can hear now. Wow. I don't know if that helps at all. We unplugged the fish tank, so hopefully that sounds a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really noticed it. It could even be on my side. The only thing that I've got in the background would be a small fan and a water feature outside, because unfortunately it's quite warm at the moment, so I've got to have my window open. Yeah, if anyone else has any questions about the gecko side of stuff and about the reptiles, or even about obviously Wally mentioned that he'd been in the aquatics side of things, and I know for a fact that Stefan is quite interested in plecos. He has the corridoras and a few tropical fish. So I think at the moment he's got 3 fish tanks. He actually lives near me, like same.
Nice.
We're quite good friends. But yeah, we do have a couple of fish keepers. We've got a tank downstairs, but it's more of like a family thing.
Sure.
Than a proper like hobby side of it. But yeah.
I know for us in the US, fish keeping, and we don't have to spend a lot of time if you don't want to in fish keeping, but for us in the US, fish keeping is a different world than in Europe. For us, it's, and I'm honestly, I'm as guilty as the next person in the US, probably more so, because my tanks are pretty bare. Some plastic plants, I don't mind algae growing on the sides. I don't have, live plant, very few live plants unless they're floating and easy to take care of. I don't have, full setups. I don't have community tanks. I've never been interested in the full setup. My love for tropical fish is to get a different kind of fish in and see them breed. Now,
Yeah.
I try to set up the tank as best as I can for their needs. I try to keep them darker. I don't know if you can see over my shoulder there. I keep them a little bit darker. I keep the water actually a little bit lower, so that I can leave a little bit of room to feed. The tank top's open. So I do things a little bit different, but it works for me, and I'm happy with it. But I know in Europe, instead of having, I have 20 tanks back there, 18 tanks. In Europe, a space like that would be one, maybe two tanks. It would just be beautiful, planted and flowing, and the fish and a real display. Whereas here, everything's on end and not really easy to see. But that's what
Yeah,
works for me.
I think a great example of a channel that is more forthcoming for the aquarium side of stuff is like your King of DIY.
Yeah.
If you've seen him and
Yes.
his tank, it shows that it's similar in a way to reptiles, where the traditional American way is a lot more kind of reduced and functional rather than elaborate and natural,
Yes.
and it's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It's a preference, and it's a, and I don't
Yes.
think anyone could really criticize one over the other, because at the end of the day, it's a lot easier to keep a tank in perfect parameters when you've got less variables like live plants that can have all these issues and algae, etc., that would naturally attach to the live plants and all that sort of stuff. So I think a lot of people, if they have questions about certain species and that, it is worth taking in mind, like bearing in mind that it's most likely to be from a tank that is set up more of I'm going to call it like a sterile style of keeping, rather than a live and bioactive would be the best term, even in the aquatics hobby. And there's a few people that do the bioactive aquatics in the US, but it's definitely more of a niche that's evolving.
It is, and that's a good thing. When you see somebody's tank set up with all the plants and it's just perfectly balanced and aquascaped, it's just a beautiful, beautiful thing. For me, it's never been a requirement to have a tank like that. My requirement is to get a healthy pair of fish and see babies. Just that, justification. Maybe a little selfish on my regard, but I want to see the fish breed. I want to see babies. The babies,
I mean, you can mono-species,
yes.
and a lot of people, especially in the UK now, they will have the did you call it like a community tank, which
Yes.
would be having plecos, cories, otter sinclair, shrimps, all these different things all in one larger tank.
Yes.
What you're doing is a completely different style, and it's one that's very interesting for people that would want to go into breeding, because a lot of people in the UK, they won't be breeding, they'll just be keeping.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
That's another thing that people have to keep in mind.
Yes, absolutely. What's your favorite?
Favorite what?
Type of setup for fish? Is it to see a big?
I want to see a display tank.
So where are you going after the show? Because it's not going to be right there.
I know Stefan would love a marine a reef tank. I've heard him sort of mention it, but it's definitely sort of down the line. It's amazing what you can sort of create. I mean, Tyler Nolan on YouTube, I believe he has quite a nice reef tank, or he did at one point. But if we move on to isopods,
Yeah, please. Sure.
44 minutes in. So if we do a bit of isopod based stuff, and then I will try and keep my eyes on the comments, which is what I'm doing down here, and we'll do a bit of a Q&A and and we'll go from there. Or if you've got any questions that you'd like to sort of throw my way, it'd be great to sort of have that side of it as well.
Perfect.
So if we move on to isopods, obviously people outside of the hobby would just know them as woodlice, slaters, roly-polies, all of these different things. And we're talking about a small crustacean that would live in your garden or a cave, or like your little, these things that you just find in the end of the garden, but they're a lot more than that. And going into the hobby, you might only have 3 species to start off with, but I'm looking at my 21 and thinking, well, it's been less than a year. No doubt you're probably closer to 50, maybe even more than that. I think we could probably double that by now, can't we, Wally?
You don't want to say the number, do you?
No, I don't.
Because you don't want to get in trouble.
Somewhere between 50 and 120.
Yeah.
There's a lot there.
We have a lot of species downstairs. Now, let me say it like this. Again, I got into isopods 5 years ago, and I stopped at a table at a reptile show. Geckos. I'm into geckos. Geckos. And I had a friend that kept rare geckos as well, but he had dart frogs, and he had enclosures that were set up just beautiful, bioactive. Charles, I want to get into this bioactive. I need some isopods. What do you have? Well, I have 20 different species. Now, 5 years ago, 20 different species was a lot of isopods. Yeah. Charles, I don't get it. Why do you have 20 different species? I just need whatever you have for bioactive isopods. That's what I want. Okay, Wally, here's your dwarf whites, and here's some powder blues. Thank you, Charles. I appreciate that. Why do you have 20? I don't get it. Well, I have these, and I don't even know what he had back then. And I have these, and I don't. How much are the dwarf whites? $5. Okay, cool. How much are these other ones? I might get into it at some point. Well, these are $20. $20 for 10 isopods? That doesn't make any sense. I can't understand why an isopod is $2 a piece. I can find them in our backyard under a log. Why are they? Well, Wally, you have to look at those shapes and the sizes and the colors and the patterns. Yeah, no, I don't get it. I don't get it at all. Well, Wally, these $20 isopods.
Oh, what would you say to yourself?
What's that?
If you could go back now, what would you say to yourself?
I should have bought as many of those $20 high-end isopods as I possibly could. So his statement back to me was, well, Wally, you won't believe this, but there are some that are $100 for a group of 10. And now, again, back 5 years ago, $100 was a lot. And
we've got 6 counts for £1,000. The Sudarmadillo spiky panda-looking ones.
Yep.
I've seen them for $1,000 for 6.
Yes, and it's that fast of a market. That's as fast as it exploded. I'll go back 5 years ago and say that a $20 culture of isopods. So there wasn't that many people keeping them. And again, poor timing on my part because I was just kind of getting out of the hobby at that time for a couple of years. But when I got back into it, now there's not 20 different isopods. There's maybe 80 or 90 or 100 different isopods. And now, again, 3 years ago, I think the big one was rubber duckies. What's a rubber ducky? Oh, that is pretty cool. That looks cool. So, I did the same thing, Scott, that you did. I went from 2 or 3 to 5 to 10 to 20.
No, you went from like 2 or 3 to 50.
I didn't take it that slow. I was a little bit quicker.
You didn't take it slow.
I dove in with both feet. So I think everybody has their interests in isopods. And if you don't know me by now, I'm not a rubber ducky person. I think they're cute. I really like how they look. But from a care standpoint,
you never see them. They're too busy. They're so busy in their own environment, filling their own niche, which is more of a fossorial species, that you don't see them. The likes of a panda king, at least you then see them more.
Yes.
A panda king should be worth this at least like the same of a rubber ducky because you get so much more out of them.
Yes.
You
I
know?
completely agree. Show me a Porcelio or Natus high yellow, and I'll jump for joy. I just love
An egg of a clown could be worth more than it is. I mean, in the UK market, you can get 10 clowns for as little as £15. And you think about them, like the second they jumped on the market, they should have been extremely big money.
There you go.
The way that they kind of interact with each other is just, they're not as I don't find that they're as likely to congregate, at least in the numbers that I've got at the moment, because I've got a large concave piece of wood in there. But when they do, and when you get that one time when you flip it over and they're all having a little conversation, it's just so brilliant. Because you see all these little babies running off and hiding in the crevices, and then you see the adults kind of pottering about, and the brave ones just stay there in their little group having their little chat. So,
and all the yes,
community.
Yes, and all the color. I mean, a zebra is really cool looking. A clown is really cool
So
looking.
happy. I've recently got champagne zebras. So
I saw that.
I'm sure about them. And
Yes.
I've got the champagne zebras. I've got the yellow zebras and the standards at the moment. So I've got really good luck at the moment because my zebras have got an explosion of mankai.
Nice.
Like there are so many little babies, and there's sort of a couple that are a bit larger, a few that are smaller. So I've at least got like a good few females that have produced. And then in my yellow zebras, I've got the same. I've got that kind of mix of sizes, and I'm getting the breeding on that as well. So I'm really happy with that. Hopefully the champagnes will follow suit.
So I have a question for you. You said that it's fair game to ask you questions. I have a question for you. Which isopods in your group that were maybe considered a little bit more difficult are you having a lot of success with? Is it the zebras? And on the other side of the coin, which isopods that maybe people said are a little bit easier than these other isopods and you're struggling with? Because I think we all have our little pockets of, gosh, everybody says that's easy, but I can't get them to breed. Or why is this? Why are people thinking that this is so difficult? Because they're going like nuts for me.
Yeah. So for me, the zebras seem to have produced a lot quicker than they should have. I've not had them for too long. And likewise with my Sevilla caramels, my initial Sevilla caramels, I had, I think, 12 individuals, 2 males, and the rest were females.
Yeah.
So the odds were looking a bit kind of skeptical.
Oh, yeah.
One male died within 3 days of getting the colony. The other male died a week later, but when I checked, all the females were pregnant. So he was very, very busy. And since I have had an explosion and I've recently acquired 25 plus more, so I've got a lovely colony of sort of sub-adult, just about getting to that crux of where they would start breeding and that. So that is going to be absolutely brilliant for me. They're one of my favorite giant species personally. And one that should have been easy that seems to be taking forever, which is going to really surprise you, is my Porcelio lavis Snow Whites.
Really? Really?
And it was bad weather, so I got them and they looked kind of half dead when I got them because they were too cold. Then they picked back up and suddenly I had a few, but I've not seen the explosion like I do with dairy cows and giant oranges, and I'm still sitting on a moderate culture rather than a booming one. But saying that, I have recently had a baby boom in there, and I absolutely love seeing them. I'm currently looking to move away from the Lavis in general, because where I'm partnered with someone, I'm not sure if you know how my invert sort of business structure is at the moment, because I don't know the position, but it's me and a guy that lives in sort of near Portsmouth, so a completely different area of the country. And he's got his cultures, I've got my cultures. We sell whatever we've got available. we split 50%, and whoever's posting them gets the postage. And that's how I feel, and it's working really well. There's the trust there, and it gives us the opportunity, because we're both younger individuals. We don't have the lovely sort of space of a house, etc. So we've got our movement, and we're kind of going there. So I'm moving my Lavis, but he's keeping his. He's got a lot more mature cultures, so we've got basically indisposable income of Lavis. We need it, you know. So it makes no sense for me to take up my very limited space that I'm actually overstocked on, and Mum's had a go at me. So I'm moving the Lavis and looking at the other ones I've got, like my Panda Kings, etc., that will eventually need to fill one of those tubs. So I'm moving specialized, if you like. So it's like if the Lavis for the leopard geckos, similar to your recent video where you're cutting down to X amount of breeding pairs. I think you said it was about 30 breeding pairs.
That's about it. Yeah, good memory.
A lot that you had, and it's a brilliant move because it lets you focus on the more sort of interesting, the more exotic, the more rare, and it's completely understandable. And it's a similar thing for me. If I can get more Spanish, more exotic armadillidium species, maybe eventually Cubaris when I get a bit more kind of income from stuff, then the sky's the limit. But it's moving on the cultures that keep you from hitting that, you know. So mine's more of a roll-in, whereas yours is a cumulative. That's kind of what I understand.
Yes, absolutely. We were very fortunate. I'm very fortunate to be able to have, you know, I shouldn't say unlimited space, because at this point so I guess I do have unlimited space, or limited space.
Going under the bed, I think the net will be a bit unimpressed, but when you get under the bed, you're fine.
No. So I probably could bring in 4 or 5 more cultures without having any issues. I hope.
For me, that you can just hide them behind another one.
I'll hide them somewhere. You know, if there's
like women with their shoes. Oh, I've had this for years. Don't worry.
Maybe they can just free range. Maybe they can just run around and.
Yeah, that would be great. Just dig up the floorboards and see all these little isopods running around.
That'll keep the family away. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. So
I thought about releasing some clowns, because then at least if we've got any insect problems, we get to see pretty ones rather than.
Yeah. We live in Wisconsin, which in the wintertime freezes, and it gets really, really cold. So our collection season, I love going out and I love turning over logs and finding what's under there. I love going out and collecting wood and collecting leaves and things like that. Yeah. We have probably like 2 months, 3 months at the very most of good weather where we could do that, because in the springtime it's all wet and swampy in a lot of these areas, and you know, it freezes up just like that here. So we have probably about 3 months. Otherwise, it would be fun to see if we lived in a climate that, you know, they would be okay almost year round. It would be fun to see something like that, to see what they do. But, you know, obviously you have to think about legalities and the impact of the environment and things like that. But if you could control it in your own backyard, that would be kind of fun.
Yeah. And like for me, I've had, from being in the hobby, I've kind of had that drive to just pop out in the garden one day, flip some rocks and see what's there. And I'm now at that point where I can be like, oh, that's Porcellio scaba, that's Foloscoia Moscorum, that's this, that's that. And even in my Acellus tub, because they were a wild caught colony, I'm seeing so much variation between them. I've got some real light forms that people argue might be pied Lavis, but if it is, I've got a fair few of them. I am personally thinking they may be an Acellus morph. And I've also got one Scaba larva that just randomly popped out of nowhere, and I don't even keep them, and one Scaba grey, which I also don't have any kind of colony of. So because it's more of a native UK colony, I'm not
Sure.
too fussed about them being the stowaway. If they were in with my Bolivari, I might be a little bit more disappointed. You know, but getting onto that kind of subject of Bolivari, obviously I mentioned to you, I think it was literally last night or the night before, about the mad aquarist
Yes.
and his way of keeping them versus the industry standard at the moment, and getting your thoughts on that. And I think that that's something that in the isopod hobby is very, very new, and it's a move forward to have people looking into the locality of these animals that aren't cubaris. You know, so to see these Hoffman Segai, to look at where they were originally kept and seeing how close we're keeping them to how they are in the wild. You know, it really shows that you've got people showing that much of an interest and that much of a.
I completely agree, and I go back to what you were mentioning earlier about reptiles. 20 years ago, we knew this much about reptiles. Now we know this much about reptiles, and it's because some reptiles, I shouldn't say all reptiles, but some reptiles, because people are spending the time to research and to try different things. And okay, the books say this. The books say that this is a desert species, but here's a great example. I'm keeping the helmeted gecko. It's a real small gecko. It's probably about 3 inches. But doing research, you have to. But doing research, helmeted geckos are found on the western edge of the Sahara Desert, but the desert actually in Morocco extends all the way to the coast in some areas. So the helmetids that are found on the coastal end, where most of them are collected because it's easy there, most of those, all of those, in fact, are a certain size. But if you go in 50 to 100 miles into the desert and find helmeted geckos there, they're 1.5 to 2 times as big as the coastal, probably because they're getting different foods or different scenarios.
And dwarfism.
Yeah,
the distribution of the nutrients and the ability to grow, and it's a lot easier inland than it is on that coastal area.
It could be that, or it could be the temperature gradients, because in the Sahara itself, it's a lot hotter than it is in the coastal regions. Bass, northern bass, fishing wild, largemouth bass. Here in the north, a big largemouth bass would be 6, 7, 8 pounds, whereas in the southern states here, a 10, 12, 15 pounder is a big bass. So the different, because we have such a slower growing season.
Yeah, like European catfish versus,
Yeah.
like your Gulf of, like, not a Gulf, but obviously your Spanish catfish are 2 to 3 times larger than in most other sort of locales, because of the way that the environment is geared up, and just the way that it's all lined up. And it's the same. Obviously, you've got your insular dwarfism, which you also see in isopods with your Parakai, and then your Parakai, is it Corfu Island?
I believe so, yep.
And they are larger in size. And I do believe that one of my Parakai is one locale, and the other ones I got from a different breeder is another, because one is larger than the other is. But obviously, without having that knowledge and without having that assurance, they are then essentially either a mix of the two now, or it is just that I got some younger and I will see them grow and that kind of thing. But your Almira, Porcellio species Almira, and your Hoffman Segai, Almira is ex-Hoffman Segai, but they were split. And obviously, the more research that goes into it, even with that side of it, with the naming and with the taxonomy and all of that very confusing, very technical side of it, the fact that you're still seeing so many revisions like that is such a food for, you may think you've got something, and then all of a sudden you'll wake up one day and nope, it's this. You know?
And that's absolutely true. And part of that is because we're so new into this isopod hobby, but a lot of that also is that there's just not a lot of information, and the information that's out there might not, just like you were alluding to, might not be exactly correct. This helmeted gecko,
Is a massive thing at the moment, aren't they? With your copper and your magnesium, etc., and people are talking about, you know, what ratio supplements they should implement, and whether certain leaves are actually more beneficial than others because they have the more copper. And it's such a crazy thing, because you cannot say that keeping cubaris in the US with white oak, or the UK with, you know, like the oak leaves that we have here, the broadleaf oak, rather than the pointy ones that you have. It's not going to be the leaves that they're eating, and they're not going to be eating leaves. They're going to be eating bat poo and stuff like that, because they live in a cave most of the time. And that's something that Micro Exotics, the guys that I got my last order from, that's something that they really are pushing forward. I mean, I was so glad to receive that bat guano, to give it its proper name, because I'm trying it in my Bolivari, I'm trying it in my Powder King, Panda King, and I'm trying it in my Sevilla Caramels. Now, the Sevilla Caramels aren't a cave-dwelling species, but it's an example of something that wouldn't naturally go for it, and seeing how it reacts. Whereas the ones that are traditionally found in caves, it should be something that they will be absolutely drawn to. And I've noticed in my Panda Kings instantly, I looked in there the other day after putting it in the night before, and I saw 3 buried in the back guano. Absolutely buried, like literally in the middle of this. It's exciting.
it is. It is. To get back to your point about the Mad Aquarius, Chris Biggs, I just don't know what he's talking about, because he's crazy. He's just a crazy guy. To be all honest, he's a great, great, great fellow, and I joke with him all the time. He's a very outgoing person. I'm a very introverted person. You probably don't get that because, but on screen here on YouTube, because I'm talking about, you know, something that's a passion of mine. But I'm an extremely introverted person. But Chris is out there all the time, 100%. That's how he is. But his point, and I think that, you know, we've got some great isopod people in the hobby. We've got some bad ones. We've got some good ones, just like any other hobby. But we have, you know, we're fortunate to have Chris Biggs and Russ Wilson in the hobby. Great, great, great people. But Chris made the point, you know, why are we all keeping them, you know, textbook? Point number 2, do this. Point number 3. Well, I put out these videos and I say, do this, do this, do this, do this. But, you know, I'm also trying different things here in our facility. Chris is trying different things in his facility. It gets back.
You try what you can afford. If you've got a limited amount and you're really focused on, I need these to do well, you go try and test it. But if you've got the rocks, I mean, keeping it family friendly, if you've got the rocks to go for it, then do it and see. You know, if you've got, say, 25 of something, so you've just had your first lot of mankai, put them in a separate tub, split them into 2 colonies, treat one way, treat another the other way, and see which one does better, and just do these little experiments. You know, and if you've got the time and space to do it, it will really propel the hobby forward.
I agree with that. I agree with that, and I'll throw in that it doesn't even have to be different tubs, because of the point that you made earlier. You know, if I'm feeding this leaf and somebody says, well, this leaf might work better, well, why don't I give them both leaves? Why don't I give them 2 different sides of the enclosure and give them both? You know, for crested geckos, I don't put them in an enclosure that's 74 degrees. I put them in an enclosure that's maybe 68 on the bottom and 78 on top, and let them choose what they want. Let them choose the warm side if they want, and then have the ability to move away from that warm side to a cooler side and self-regulate to
rather than keeping them at room temperature and having them have to be comfortable whatever you choose.
Exactly.
You know, whatever you set the thermostat at is what the gecko has to live in. And, you know, I think even with those lower temperature animals, you've got to have the ability to cool them down slightly. So maybe have a PC fan for airflow, and
Yep.
you've got the ability to slightly raise the temperature so they've got a gradient. And I fully agree that that should be like as part of the fundamentals of keeping. I do feel somewhat guilty with my scorpions and with my other inverts, because quite often a lot of people say they do well at room temperature, so you keep them at room temperature. But the temperature ranges on care sheets can be anywhere from like 22 to 28 degrees Celsius, which for you, I believe, would be about 62 to 83 or something along those lines.
Yeah. So my point is, though, that why are we taking these care sheets and saying it says this degree right here? Here's the range right here. Okay, that's exactly what I'm going to give them in their enclosure. Let's stop doing that. Let's stop. Yep, let's give them the ability.
Climate date is that.
Yep, let's stop doing that, and let's give them a gradient so that they can choose what they want. And relating that over to isopods, then, why are we, I can't believe people will message me and say, I've been feeding them, I give them the leaves and the wood, and I've been feeding them flake food, and they're just not reproducing. Well, one day feed flake food, and the next day or week or whatever, however your maintenance schedule is, try dried fish. And then the next time, try
my initial feeding video, like my different foods that I use, and that's probably 10 times more than the standard isopod keeper in that. And I think that, like the likes of myself, you, Russ, the people that are really kind of more willing to chuck in these different feeds and these different mixes. You've got your supreme Gecko chow, like the isopod chow. And if I could get some over here, then that would be absolutely brilliant. But unfortunately, it's US only. But we do have companies here that are doing similar and stuff like that. Like even your Rapashi, people realize they can get any Rapashi off the shelf, and 99% of them you can mix up and feed to a leopard gecko, or just put in the powder. They probably eat just the powder, and it just means that your food options are limitless. They're more wide than you can feed a gecko. You can give an isopod more individual different foods than you can feed these reptiles and these amphibians and that, because you're not got the risk of the parasites, etc. and that, because a lot of it is already in that kind of biome.
That's exactly true. And I think, going back to Chris Biggs, I think his point is valid. He's saying it on YouTube, and I've also been saying it as well, but I've been communicating to people that I think in the next 2 or 3, 4 years, we're going to go from, oh my gosh, Cuberis rubber duckies are so difficult. I get them in, I look, to, oh my gosh, everybody has rubber duckies, to the point where they're not as popular as maybe they are right now. So the point is that somebody's going to hit on some of these by trying different things, per what Chris is saying, and it's going to hit. And somebody's going to come up with a formula. Well, I'm also putting mushrooms in there. Oh, mushrooms. Oh, that's brilliant. I've never tried that. Well, that's what it's going to take.
Natural mushrooms. And I just left them in there. A lot of people would take them out. But if you leave them in there, they do their cycle, they break back down, and the isopods will eat it. It's part of the natural environment. It can't be, there is no way that it's negative. And even the ones that are deadly to humans, you'll probably find isopods do fine with them, because they've got the metabolism, they've got that gut structure to go into that and to do it. And even in terms of like how you're keeping them, etc. With rubber duckies, you're not keeping them in any kind of way that is similar to where they live.
Right.
In theory, if you've got the money, or if someone's got the time, like yourself or Chris Biggs or whatever, it would be really interesting to have a high percentage back guano substrate with a limestone, actual pieces of limestone around the outside of a tub or something, and have less of like a hide or whatever, and have kind of like ledges or cracks or crevices that you might be able to move out, and see how much that makes a difference, and keeping that environment more alkaline, so it's literally like a cave. It sounds really over the top, but you think how beneficial that could be for the actual invertebrates themselves, and no one's going to try it until it's put out there, and someone like Chris Biggs goes, actually, you know what? I'm bored today. I'm going to do that. And I think that's what it is. People just wake up one day, they've got a bee in their bonnet, they want to do something, they look up there, they think, oh, Armadillidium maculatum yellow zebras. Let's have a look. Where do they come from? What does the place look like? I'm bored. I'm going to recreate that and see what happens.
Yep.
You know?
I completely agree.
With Bioactive. Bioactive only came about because someone thought, I'm bored of this, I want to do this. And it's taken off exponentially year after year now. You know, we wouldn't have the kind of businesses we have without that initial kind of exposure from Bioactive and the fact that everyone wants Lavis, Scaba and Prunosis for their tanks. If they didn't see those, then they wouldn't see the pretty ones, and we would be an extremely niche, almost like a mail order, underground, you know, it'd be like, oh, have you got any isopods? You know, like, it'd be like an under-the-counter thing. You'd go to a pet shop and be like, have you got any? And they'd be like, these ones, £5, go on. You know,
it would be just like it was 5 years ago in my mind when I talked to my friend Charles. I don't understand why there's more than two. It doesn't make any sense in my mind why you would have more than just two isopods. And him to explain and educate me on why there are more. So now they're like Beanie Babies to me. I want as many of, or Pokemon. They're like Pokemon. I want to catch them all.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And I think the sky is the limit for like the isopods, and especially with Cubaris. I mean, there's got to be a discussion about the ethics of these Cubaris, because if you find a small population of 50, you take 25 out, manage to get them breeding and sell them off for £500 each, then that's brilliant for you, but that could completely destroy an ecosystem that you've just stumbled across. You know?
And some of those discussions have already started. Obviously, in Cuba, they realized the limitations of such a small area and its impact on the fauna to take larger numbers out, and they shut it down.
The Cuba. That's the Pseudarmadillidium.
The spiky.
The spiky. Yeah. I saw a picture of them, and they are like a life goal. But I do understand that it is very, very frowned upon, similar to the likes of some of these spiders in the arachnid hobby, where you've got the Typhocloana celadonia being smuggled out of countries and illegally sold, and it's really damaging, you know. And when you've got something with high demand, you'll get that. And it's obviously a lot easier to sneak woodlice through, because people don't have that care and that interest. It's only the people that are environmentalists and that have like the appreciation of an ecosystem at that level, because they're not fluffy and they don't make some magical impact when you stumble across one in a forest. They go under, they're not part of it, you know. And that's a really bad thing.
It's
because
a hard
deforestation. This is like a modern deforestation, or it could be, where people take out these isopods without thinking about it, and then suddenly you have a climate crisis because they're not in there doing what they need to be doing.
We see that in pretty much all different, you know, species, different types of animals. You know, we see endangered lists. We see with geckos the CITES list. And years ago, we saw that Madagascar went through huge importations. We saw the electric blue, the Lygodactylus williamsi, beautiful, beautiful animal, that is maintained in about a 50-kilometer area, and that's all. And they were harvested so much that when they, at least in the United States, when they came in about 12 or 15 years ago, they became, oh, I don't want them because everybody has them now. And then there were none in the hobby because the people that were bringing them in either didn't show the long-term initiative to keep them and breed them, or didn't understand how to keep them. But eventually we lost out on keeping them, and they had, and then you know, I can't remember if it's Madagascar. The place shut down, and we couldn't get any more until
Yeah,
just a few years ago.
the
So-
animals that you could have had coming out of Australia, like you're talking about, there's 8 species. There's 8 species of bearded dragon. In the hobby, you have access to 3, and one of them is likely from an originally smuggled individual.
Yep. So my thoughts on that are that, is it bad that that person imported, I shouldn't say imported, smuggled in those animals and worked with them and understood them?
Yes and no.
It obviously depends on the person. Absolutely. So we don't want them just willy-nilly coming into the country. Anybody go ahead and go down to Australia and take Nephurus, the knobtail geckos, as many as you want. We don't want that. But we don't want it. I feel personally, we don't want it completely shut down. I think it should be a very, very controlled situation, so that
we need modern approaches to archaic problems.
Exactly.
We're talking about problems before we even had Microsoft and before we had the internet and everything like that. So you didn't have tracking. You had a pile of paper this big that someone skimmed through, stamped it, and said, "Cool." Now you've got your scanners, you've got your data tagging. So if you had breeders in Australia and they needed to ship externally, there is nothing stopping the Australian government from saying, it is required for you to microchip the animal, same as CITES, and to have that traceable. So in the export process, the customs of Australia scan the animal, know that it's come from a registered breeder, it's come from a registered source, and it's leaving the country without an illegal side to it. Because there will always be a black market, but there is so much potential for Australia to reopen and other places to reopen, but they won't because of the previous miscommunications and the previous irresponsibility. And it's that fear of, we don't need this happening again.
This is absolutely true.
This caused us cane toads. This caused us in the US iguanas and stuff like that. And the issue is, like, yes, you can shut down borders, but you're still going to have the guy around the back of like some criminal enterprise saying, I can get you any animal you want, just give me enough money and I'll get it for you.
Absolutely.
It will never stop. It just means that the countries that are too fearful to reopen will have more of a chance of there being more illegal trade, in my opinion.
Yeah, there has to be a happy medium. There has to be control. There has to be, a certain number exported. But more importantly, there has to be that management in-house of the people that are allowed to bring them in. Maybe it's a matter of giving them a license at a high cost, and that cost then supports the control and the management of those facilities.
Because if it's too high, people won't get the license and they'll do it under the cost. It needs to be at that level where it's high enough to deter irresponsible people, but not high that it's prohibitive. Because if you go prohibitive, then you run into moonshine and you run into all these other things that have come through where you'll just get the same amount of trade, but done very, very nefarious and very sort of like without the backing of the government.
Exactly.
Similar to anything you can look at. You could go into all sorts here. And if we tie it back in with the isopods, Gibaris are absolutely brilliant. Pseudarmadillo are absolutely brilliant. But you've got to think about the ethics of these new amazing animals coming in. Like, how many were taken, how many remain, and how much damage was done to the environment to get them to you.
Absolutely. Yep.
It's so brilliant to have these opportunities to get importers straight from Thailand or straight from these different countries. But if you don't have the sort of reassurance of a reputable process, then you can't say whether this person's gone into a cave, got literally every single one they can find, and sells them off for a massive profit.
And that, again, that's pretty much what happened with the electric blues.
Hmm.
But this is a pretty heavy topic.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more than happy to lighten it back up and come back from this. It's something that needs to be said, and like I wouldn't discuss this with anyone else. Like I am absolutely honoured to be having this deep of a conversation with yourself and with Nanette. I mean, she's being very nice and quiet in the corner, but the fact that she's here is almost like, I'm very sorry, Wally, but Nanette has made it for me.
I take that as an honor because your comment there is it's nice to have her in the show, whereas many other viewers of my channel say, Wally, you're done. You're done. Nanette or Crystal should take over the show. You're out, and they're in. Sorry.
I don't know how that would work. I feel like the two of them, it would just be like, oh, that's a scary thought.
It's always a pleasure to have Nanette or Crystal on any of our broadcasts. And you've been quiet. You've been quiet because I probably haven't said too much that you take exception to. Otherwise, you wouldn't be quiet.
I mean, I'm not sure if we've. I'm pretty sure I haven't sent you any of my stickers yet, but I'd be absolutely honoured to get your address after the show and to send some of my Scott's Animal Adventure stickers your way, especially for Crystal and that. I'm sure if she's anything like sort of like the younger generation here, the stickers of like different YouTubers and that is just a really, really fun side to the hobby. And I'd like to say to people as well, obviously the shirt you're wearing,
my shirt or Nanette's?
No, the shirt you're wearing, Wally. The Flavo Marginatus, I believe.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. You have obviously a number of designs, a number of colours, including the infamous Podfather shirt. I hope that's still available. Or it should be.
It is. We did that based on one person that started referring to me as the Podfather, and
honestly,
we
it's the best shirt I've ever seen.
It was a lot of fun. So at the end of the last year, we did the big 12 Supreme Days of Christmas, where we gave away thousands and thousands of dollars worth of. And this year, so last year we did the U.S. only, unfortunately for Canadian viewers and UK viewers.
Yeah,
this year we're going.
Didn't I?
I would really, really, really like to open it up and have Canada and the UK and, I don't know how far we can take this, but I'd really like to have a couple of different vendors help us out there.
With our breeding plans and with our outlay at the moment of species that we're kind of bringing in and dealing with, it would be great to sort of be a part of that by the end of the year if we've got something to do. And also, like I said to you last year, if you ever did have someone that kind of threw you that was accidentally entered into the wrong the wrong country's draw, obviously I sort of gave you a couple of suggestions, and I think that the 12 Supreme Days of Christmas is just a real representation of the kind of people that you are, to be that generous and that forthcoming and the companies that you was getting behind, and that obviously it meant the world to them, and it's really just invaluable. Like, it's such an amazing thing.
Thank you very, very, very much. I look forward to it every year. Every year I go through a month and a half of 2 hours of sleep every single night because there's so much work to be done with communications, with everything that we're doing. But I'm stubborn and I don't delegate anything, and we'll have to change that this year, and I'll have to give away a little bit of the control here and have other people helping me. But I hope that next year we can, I don't look for, we did $5,000 worth of giveaways this year, and next year we're going to do 10. It's not that. It's finding the right vendor.
It's about the actual act of giving.
Yeah.
And the people that focus on the money are not the supporters you want. You want the supporters that appreciate what is being done. and just to put testament to you as a person, you're obviously swept off your feet during that time, yet you were still able to answer a couple of questions that I had. There was never a rude word said. There was never any kind of like, can you just leave me alone? I'm doing this. It's all about, I'm really busy today. I'll try and sort of, if I get a minute in the week, I'll get back to you. Don't worry, I will get back to you. And you did, and it's just incredible the way that you can dedicate that much time. Like, I can imagine that I'm not the only one that gets in touch. I mean, Frank the Tank is obviously a massive, massive follower of you and Russ. And I've now sort of befriended him, and just an amazing guy. And I can imagine he's quite often asking questions. He's that way inclined. It's a brilliant thing, but to have someone never get frustrated at their supporters. I would say fans, but we're not necessarily fans. We're more of a community and a family than a fan, because you're very much putting yourself at the level of the people that are watching you. There is no kind of, I'm the person in charge. You are all my minions. You're my people that I delegate to, and I'm doing you the service. It's always, I'm a person, you're a person. Let's talk. Let's get to the best I can.
You talk about transparency. There will never, ever, ever be a time where I ever feel like I know more than somebody else, or I'm better than somebody else, or I have better animals than somebody else, because there will always be a time where I make mistakes. There's always going to be a time where I lose an animal, or I lose a group of isopods or something. And if I ever feel like
Bolivari, you had such a die-off at the start of your Bolivari, and you were completely honest about that and completely focused on telling people your experience and not putting it off as, I'm really good at breeding these, look at what I've got now.
So I tell people this all the time. Listen to some of the, don't exclusively listen to what I say, but listen to some of the things that I say, because if anybody's made more mistakes that you can learn from than me, I'd like to find that person. I've made a lot of mistakes, but I tell you what, I am transparent, and I'll share those experiences so that hopefully you don't make the same mistakes. And we will. We're all going to do that. So it is a community. It's not Wally has 100 different isopods, so he knows everything about it. That's not the case at all. I have 100 different groups of isopods, and I've made mistakes probably with every single one that I would love to share with you, so you don't make those mistakes.
I mean, you had the revelation of the cork part. The how do you call it?
The concave.
Yeah.
The bridge. The bridge.
The shape and the form of the cork bark for different species can make a massive difference to how they perform, alongside whether you use cork bark or whether you use a natural oak bark that you might find in the wild and stuff like that. How knobbly it is, how smooth it is, all of these different aspects. And for you to put that out there for the people to see is something that a lot of people wouldn't, because if they've got this massive explosion from just changing flat to curved, a lot of people will keep that to themselves because they see that as their ticket to the,
There's a term in the hobby called gatekeeper. I have a special
engineering where you've got the knowledge, so you don't want to impart it because someone's going to outdo you.
No, that's not here, and it never, ever, ever will be. If I have an animal that I love, I would love to have babies, and I would love to sell you some of those babies, but God help me if I keep information back and you lose your babies, then that's on me. And I never, ever want to have that feeling like I'm holding back information that might cause your animals not to be healthy. I am not a gatekeeper whatsoever.
Yeah, because a lot of dog breeders, they'll say keep it this humidity, and it might be too low for the animal because they feel like if I just tweak this ever so slightly so that they do slightly less better, then I'm going to get more of the business and more of the market share. And those kind of people are just the bane of any kind of hobby, any kind of sort of profession as well. Like, and you know, yourself, Russ, Chris Biggs. I mean, these three people. I mean, Wally Kern, Russ Wilson, and Chris Biggs should be, and this is wholeheartedly my opinion, should be your go-to initially when you're starting up with it, isopods, and especially with you for geckos, because you cannot go wrong with people that have made these mistakes and been completely honest about it. You know, as same as there was a YouTube channel called Heretic Nurture or Heretic Nature, and he had a lot on the Parakai. Now, there wasn't much information out about Parakai, but he was really good. The filming and that was a lot more homebrew in terms of like the way that it was shot, etc. So it wasn't quite the production that you get from these larger channels, but the knowledge and the information in that, you could tell that it was worth it. You know, and I think a lot of people should be sort of moving away from books, because a book can be 20 years old and still be classed as gospel. You know, you look at Cornsnake books from the 80s and people still go by them as the Bible. It's not true. You know, it's outdated. It's not updated. You know, you look at reptile websites and that. You look at when it was made. The best thing you can do is, when you're looking for care sheets, is look for one that's the most recent, and get a few that are the most recent, and look at the peaks. It's always look at the, obviously your information, if you treat that as peaks, and then on the next care sheet it will have peaks. If you can put them together and you get ones that match up, you can trust that. If you get them and then suddenly one's here and the other one's here, then that's likely not going to be a reliable piece of information, and you need to find another source that matches up with at least one of them.
And
You know,
that
that's
other,
why I go.
and I'm going to add to that, that other source should be you. That other source should be you doing the research. Find three people, that's great. If it's Chris and it's Russ and it's myself, that's fantastic.
As well.
But that other resource should be you, and you should be taking Russ's comments and taking Chris's comments. And if you want to take Wally's comments, that's great. Match them up. And if there's two that are the same and one that's different, then that fourth decision point should be you. Go out to you know, Google Scholar. Google Scholar. Sometimes my tongue doesn't work. Go out to Google Scholar and do the research yourself and look. I made this comment in a video that I just did about a fellow crested gecko keeper when I started off. Was just the opposite of me, just absolutely the opposite. And I couldn't understand, because I was having some success and he was having success, but he was doing things completely different. What I did was I took his information, didn't ignore it, but kept an open mind and pulled it back and said, why? Why is this working for him? And I'm doing something completely different and it's working for me. Ultimately, you as the fourth resource going out to do the research, you should be thinking about what happens in nature. Find out how these animals are living in nature. Find out as much information about Dave Kaufman, Reptile Adventures does a great, you know, here's how it looks in nature, and that should be one of your sources.
With me to go on to, I think it's called like World Weather or something like that. There's a website, and I will find a link to the one that I use. But I type in Chaos de Cochinos, which is an island off of Honduras where my Hog Island boa is naturally from. Obviously, mine's captive bred. It's never seen it. It's never been there. It's so removed from there. It will probably go there and think, well, this is a nice holiday. But in terms of keeping it in the hobby, you can't get more of a biological template than looking at historical climate data, looking at last year where the humidities hit, where the temperatures hit, looking at, say, rainfall. So looking at whether you have a mister system like me that is automated for your majority of your humidity during the dry season, and then during the wet season you go for more violent fluctuations with a hand mister, with a coarser mist more like a monsoon style situation. And
Yep.
those little things, it might seem like a nothing and it might seem like an overcomplication. And I'm holding my hands up. It is. You know, I change the humidity most months and I change the temperature most months. And you can keep them constant, perfectly all right. But it's got to be a beneficial thing to give them that side of a care. You know,
And some animals, it doesn't matter. Some animals, it doesn't matter. Throw dairy cows in a coffee can with some dirt in it, and you're going to have babies. Some animals, like Bolivari or Magnificus, you better kind of nail a lot of the requirements down. One of the big
example, my Lavis, my dairy cows, I had them in with a boa, very sort of humid, sort of 65 upwards, the highest humidity being even close to like mid 80s, and they did great. I put them in the corn snake, they did all right, and that's sort of like room humidity. Put them in the hog nose, and they're still be all right. Like they're still all right, you know, and that's like 35 up to sort of like 65 at a push. You know, there's such a bomb-proof isopod. If you did that with an ornatus or something like that, it's like with your millipedes, you can't have temperature fluctuations sometimes. You know,
good example.
And cycling, like some tarantulas, people never realised you had the temperature cycle to get them successfully breeding. And obviously, people in the hobby would think that that's crazy because the amount of animals that need a cycle and a brumation of sorts is like outweighing the possibility of animals that can just breed on the fly. You know,
there's some isopods, powder blues. I had an infestation in one of my cultures of powder blues, or high-end isopod, and powder blues got in there. So I pulled all of the high end out, set them up, and then took that whole tub, and I didn't have a chance to change it out or do anything with it. There were probably a couple dozen powder blues, and I set it on a shelf. A month and a half later, I finally went to it to clean it out, to set it up with a different isopod, and here's all these powder blues running all over the place. A month and a half of neglect, dry as a bone. Whereas with another isopod that I had, Bolivari, I opened the lid and I'm listening to a radio station and the song changed and they all flipped over dead.
Yeah, that's how it feels.
That's how
when I had my Hoffman Sega, I had 5, and they lasted, say, a month and a half. And they were all a decent sort of size to start off with. It could have just been the fact that it was just their time, but
it could be in shipping. We don't know. Could have been in shipping.
The Bolivari I've got at the moment, I've had a few die off, but I've spotted 3 Mankai, and I am holding out for the Mankai. So, I've also been a bit ballsy, and I've sort of implemented a small bit of what Chris was saying in his video. So I've added a bit of back guano to it. I did give them a bit more of a thorough mist, but I'm going to leave them obviously longer than any other isopods, and probably just see how they take to the situation. But I did notice what he was saying, where they all then congregated on the cook bark as you would expect the isopods to be doing. So it did seem like there was a lot more of a natural behavior, because before you'd almost have to fish around and see where they were, see which ones had died, see which ones were alive, and that kind of thing. Whereas after that initial kind of change, it sort of synced up with other Porcellio species and how they would normally interact.
Right.
So it's very, very interesting. And obviously I'll keep people updated. I'm looking to boost that colony and try and get some more individuals soon through microexotics again.
Perfect.
So, fingers crossed for those. The only ones I haven't seen breeding at the moment are my Hassai, and I believe that the only reason they're not breeding at the moment is probably because they're just coming into maturity. They're if that's about Hoffman Segai sort of Hassai adult, they're about sort of 3/4 of the way there at the moment. And I think, am I right in saying that Hassai normally breed a little bit later than standard Spanish?
I think that they're right in the giant Spanish isopods. I personally feel that I struggled with the Magnificus. They took the longest. They were adults for
Some
months and
people
months.
think they're seasonal. I mean, my
I don't know about
my
that.
buddy has said that he believes they're seasonal because he's had Magnificus for ages. Like I'm talking, I got my first lot of isopods in November time, I believe. My first three species. And he had the Magnificus back then, still not seeing babies, but still doing okay.
So
It's a very, very odd situation.
Here's the question we have to ask. So somebody will message me. I mentioned that I get so many questions a day. What's the proper humidity for Periodora picta?
There is no proper humidity. The proper humidity is humidity of the environment.
The
You know,
problem,
look at where they are.
the problem is that I don't know how your house is set up. My house is this way. My humidity, it gets bone dry in our house in the wintertime.
You've got an AC. If they haven't, if they don't need an AC, they'll have higher humidity because an AC often pulls moisture out, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. So to relate that back to your point about the Magnificus being seasonal, boy, I can't talk for our English-speaking friends here. So the Magnificus, I don't know if they're seasonal, or they're temperature specific for breeding. So
You might even need to cycle them. You might need to drop it, bring it back up, and they might then start breeding. We don't know enough.
yes,
You know?
yes.
I would
Absolutely.
urge someone to go to look at where the Magnificus are collected, not necessarily like the country, but look at the actual town where the majority of Magnificus would be found. Look at the climate data like I did for my boa and try and replicate seasons. Obviously, err on the side of caution when you see the lows, err on the side of caution when you see the highs. Because the likelihood is, even though they're not a fossorial isopod, if you're hitting 45-degree heat outside, they're going to find a way to get out of that heat. Whether that's going down, going under woods, in the bark of a tree, whatever. Like, you're not going to get that in an environment. But if you can replicate a fluctuation and a environment, even to the point of maybe getting a small PC fan, like a really tiny one, and having a constant forced airflow if there's always a wind in the air where they're from. You know, if you've got a cubic feet per minute that you can boost and you see that increase in breeding, that is invaluable to the hobby. I think
I find that
we back.
In my mind, I've always focused on,
Is that my connection or your connection?
humidity, rainfall, things like that. One of the factors in care of any animals, geckos, and isopods that I haven't focused on mistakenly, and I'm increasing my knowledge of now and moving forward, is wind. I think wind and ventilation have a significant impact. And I'm not just talking about isopods. I'm talking about geckos as well. So is 80?
You've got balance Macularius montanus versus Macularius. So that's the leopard gecko versus the montanus leopard gecko. And you can imagine that even though they're technically classed as sort of like the same gecko, they are vastly different in terms of appearance. And that's got to state that there must be some big difference in the environment that they're from. Like, you can't say that the mountainous regions of Pakistan and the deserts, etc., where these geckos are found, don't have a good airflow, because there is no way that you do not have an air current when you've got a gradient of X amount. It's not a flat plane. It's always like that. And the second you've got that and you've got heat, you get a current of air. And that's how your thermals work, and that's how mountains and that, they have that lift, because that is how air works. The cool air, the hot air is up, obviously. It cools down and then it rests at the bottom and gets heated back up. But the second you've got a gradient that it can go to, you get the airflow and you get the wind and that. So there can't be a single animal out there that can sit in a tub with no wind, no airflow, other than one that might be in a cave so deep that it doesn't see the outside world.
That's exactly true. And when we talk about topics like humidity and temperature, and somebody says, I keep my leopard geckos at 80 degrees ambient temperature, and somebody else says, well, I keep them at 75, those two factors might be completely different based on, other factors within their house, with the airflow, with many, many other factors. So I think that, my point is that we can't just take a number and say that's gospel. We have to look at all the factors combined. We have to look at lighting available. Could isopods benefit from some kind of a UVB, UVA kind of exposure? We don't know. We don't know. I know that they're forest floor and they don't get much exposure, but I know they get some exposure. So how beneficial is the proper lighting? I don't know. So I think that, again, circling all the way back to Chris Big's comment, I think that what's that?
The same as your heating and everything like that. Your main heat source is the sun. But if you are not getting direct sunlight, the main heat source would be infrared B and infrared C, because the initial infrared, although it's the most penetrative and the most beneficial, will be filtered out before it gets to you, and then you're dealing with radiated heat. So everything around you is getting heated up, and then that's radiating the heat that you're experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
So with nocturnal species, a ceramic heat emitter is by far the most beneficial in all theories, because at night you will only ever get reflective heat, and that is what a ceramic heat emitter does. Whereas if you've got a diurnal species, a halogen bulb is absolutely perfect. It's almost identical to the sun. And I've covered this on my Facebook groups ages ago, and I'm going to dig up the posts and sort of repost them, add anything that I've sort of learned since. But for a crepuscular species like you have with your leopard geckos and that, you could argue that something like a heat emitter that is the majority of IRB with some infrared A and some infrared C, which would be similar to a sunset in theory, because that level is kind of more in between, sort of like your reflective light coming through and your sunlight going down. That is then, in theory, your crepuscular level. And if there were studies done on it, I would put money on the fact that diurnal species are beneficially kept with a halogen bulb or a floodlight bulb, something that produces a majority wavelength similar to the sun. A crepuscular species is beneficial to have a heat emitter, and a nocturnal species should have a ceramic heat emitter. But it should only have a ceramic heat emitter on during the day, the same as it would be in the wild. And that may confuse people, because they might think, well, that's not correct. But if it's only on during the day, then it still reflects that heat at night, and it still gets that drop, if you can have the drop. And it's a really confusing thing. It's something that in the reptile hobby is so covered and so researched at the moment, with the likes of Francis Baines, Roman Murin, and the guys over at Advancing Herpetological Husbandry and reptile lighting groups, that as far as you want to go, you can go. These are doctors, they're PhD, masters, incredibly clever people, and they're still learning. So how can the guy down the road that's been keeping reptiles since the 80s say that a T8 bulb is perfect for a UV source?
Absolutely.
With any animal, you can have the same thing. It's just having the people with the interest to go that far. And I think with you, with Russell, with Chris, with myself, it's that emerging side of it in these isopods and in the other less invested, like, exotic hobbies.
I think you're going to. I'm going to throw a blatant plug for the Supreme Gecko channel, but it's not for the Supreme Gecko channel. It's for a new company that's coming out, and this feels like an advertisement, and I don't mean for it to feel like an advertisement, but on the topic of researching and understanding and sharing in the next hour, well, maybe hour and a half now. I have a video of an interview with Ryan McVeigh and Erica Mead McVeigh on a new product launch, a new company launch, Vivitech, and I feel, in my honest opinion, and through my experience, I think that this is going to be revolutionary to the hobby, the reptile hobby at least, and hopefully has a broader application than just reptiles. And this is a product that's coming out this weekend. And again, I feel like this is an ad, but please, if anything, put the ad part of it. If you're not looking for new bulbs or any of that, listen to this interview that's coming out later today, because there's a ton of information from these folks, and they have tons and tons of connections and research and experience with some pretty heavy duty animals. And I think that they will be doing an amazing thing in the future in introducing some of these products, but more importantly, introducing this webpage and getting this word back out to the community. I think that we need to do that more in the community, and I think that this is I think there's a lot of great Facebook groups out there, but I think that we need, like you were mentioning before, I think that we need certain people to step up and share some of that information, and I'm excited that this Vivitech is going to be out there for everybody to take part in. So, Viatech, Vivitech, Viatech, Vivitech. We'll get it right. So, anyways, I've got a video coming out later today, so watch it. If nothing else, just to pull some of this kind of information out from some pretty high level experts.
Very educational.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Very.
Yeah, definitely something later. And I will say as well, like in terms of the way that people are keeping invertebrates and that, I'm trying to sort of pioneer my own way in that. And obviously I've recently shown you my enclosures. I'm looking at eventually maybe manufacturing, but for now it's for my own sort of enjoyment of manufacturing something from scratch, with the acrylic enclosures that I'm looking at, and having the black sides and to make the animal feel more secure. And I think even in terms of isopods, I mean, you instantly were hooked on, we could definitely try this for an isopod enclosure. And I would very much doubt that the majority of people would keep isopods in an enclosure that would most likely cost sort of $20, maybe more. I don't know what the price of materials, etc., would be over there, but the fact that you've had the hobbyists that have turned into enthusiasts like me, yourself, Chris, Russ, it gives them the opportunity to have a potentially outstanding environment for the animals. And it allows you to have that flexibility of keeping them in an environment that suits them, but also there's certain functionalities you can add to it that make it good for the user as well.
I've seen your design. You've sent it over, and I was really excited at seeing the design. Thank you very much for sharing. I'm excited to see this moving forward and seeing this available to other hobbyists. It's a nice design.
Two more, a slight redo in terms of design after what I learned from the first one. So these ones will be for the dwarf scorpions, like the initial one I've done, but with a slight revision now I know the manufacturing process. So tomorrow I should be getting the shipment of plastic, and then I'll be able to start work on that. So I'm really excited. But I do believe if I go into my StreamYard bits on my brand, I think from the live stream I did with Ben Butler a couple of weeks ago, I can actually show people in case they haven't seen. So if you're happy for me to just throw a clip out there just quickly of one of these enclosures.
That's great. I do have to run, Scott. I've got this video that I need to get out there at 5 o'clock. It takes about, which is an hour from me now, and it takes about an hour to upload.
I completely understand that.
I greatly apologize. I wish I had more time. This is a blast. If you wouldn't mind, I'd love to come on a second time, or I'd love to have you on our channel and let's talk about animals.
It would be an honor to be on your channel, definitely, and I'd always have you back. I'm also quite tempted to see if Russ might be willing to pop over and sort of have a similar chat. But thank you so much for your time. It's been absolutely incredible having you on. It's really just been a real pleasure, especially with your lovely wife Nanette with you. And you know, it's a real privilege to have someone that I regard so highly just here with me talking about a shared interest and a shared hobby. Like, I am still a bit shell-shocked that we're here.
It's been my pleasure entirely, and again, it's all community, and you being a member of the community and sharing the information like you're sharing. I think this is great. And I promise next time, if I come on your channel, I'll leave Nanette out, so maybe we can get a word in edgewise, because I tell you, for her to monopolize the conversation like she has, I'm embarrassed. I apologize. From the depths of my heart, I apologize for. I've had a blast. Thank you very much.
We'll come on next side. I'll get a picture of Nanette to put on the thumbnail instead.
Outstanding. Enjoy, Scott. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. You take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So, right, guys, I am going to jump on the comments. I'm sorry I haven't been very receptive to them. I'll put myself back on large so I know what I look like. So has anyone got a final closing question? Sonora and Herp Haven, who's Chris and Russ? So if you look up Aquariumax Pets, I've got a really dry throat all of a sudden, I'm sorry. So that is Russell, the Aquariumax Pets, and Chris is Chris, the Mad Aquarist, I believe, in apostrophes. Sorry, bear with me, I'm just typing. Biggs. So if you type in these guys, you should find them. Thank you very much for the kind words as well, Sonora and Herp Haven. Thank you for sharing the link, Stefan. It's been great having you as a moderator. I hope you don't mind me just dropping you in there, but I thought you'd make a really good mod. Let's have a look. Who else have we got? So we've got 5 people watching, but I'm only seeing 3 people in the chat. So if you'd like your shout out, please make yourself known. Let's see who's still here. Really big shout out to Diana Fletcher if she's still in the room. Obviously, I've got her an order being sent out. So Diana, I really hope that gets to you safely. If there are any issues because of the heat, do not hesitate to get in touch with me and I'll sort something out for you. But hopefully your little girl likes her surprise isopods and hopefully you like your ones as well. Just having a scroll, seeing if we've got any. It feels so much different when you're on your own. Seeing if we've got any more questions. I'll go to the live chat in case I'm missing stuff. But yeah, it seems like everyone's kind of settling down. So if we call it a night, I will keep an eye on the comments. Do not be afraid to get in touch with me on Instagram, Facebook. Leave a comment on this video after it's back up and you can use a normal comment and I'll try and answer the best I can. Please do go and follow Wally. If you look in the description, you'll see all of his links. Please just go every single one that you've got an account on, just go and follow, because he is so active on all of them, and you will find other stuff that you won't find elsewhere, say on Instagram or on Facebook. I believe I've included his business Facebook. He does have a personal Facebook, but obviously we don't want to overwhelm him. So thanks very much, guys, and it's been a great one, and I'll catch you in the next one. So cheers, and I will see you soon once I close the stream.